Hello everyone, my name is Michelle. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another video. It's Thursday morning. Today we are staying with the Summer Wells case, and in particular we are talking about the allegations made by Summer Wells' father, Don Wells, regarding his extended family. So abuse perpetuated by and towards various members of his family across generations. And we're going to assume that what Don Wells has said recently, a couple of days ago now, on Miss Daisy's channel, Crime Crazy and Critters on the Farm, link to that is in the description box. I'll also link in the cards and in the description box the live stream that I did yesterday going through this. He's made allegations on previous occasions, so we're going to incorporate some of those as well into this video. We're going to look at this not from the lens of drama, but from a lens of intergenerational abuse, and we're going to look at the psychology of intergenerational abuse. So, with all that said, obviously this is a very emotive topic. We will be talking about SA. In some instances, this is against very young children, so just bear that in mind. Alright guys, all that said, let's go. Okay, these are some of the allegations made by Don Wells, and in this graphic here, he is Don Wells Jr. and he's part of the second generation, the second of three generations that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to outline the allegations that Don has made, and just to remind you who is the centrepiece of this, who is making these allegations, we've got a nice pretty picture of Don Wells Jr. right there. So let's explain who all these people are, their connections, and then we'll add in the links regarding the abuse allegations made. Don Wells and his two bio sisters are the product of Don Wells Sr. and Karen. So they got divorced. Karen married her second husband, who is Earl Kelly. On previous occasions, Don has said that this guy, Earl Kelly, not to be confused by William Gold, who was Karen's third husband and Don's second stepfather. By all accounts, he was a very nice man. And Karen and William Gold got married kind of in midlife, later life, and that's how they ended up in Tennessee, because the Gold family, that's their kind of historical land, I guess. Okay, so that's how Don ended up in Tennessee. After William Gold died in 2007, Karen lived another 4 years, and she died in 2011, and then eventually that house was passed on to Don Wells. When we're talking about the abuse in this video, we're talking about the allegations made by Don Wells regarding Earl Kelly, not William Gold. And on a previous occasion, Don has said that Earl Kelly, I'm going to draw some lines in here, Earl Kelly was abusive, and he was sexually abusive towards at least one of Don's bio sisters. I can't remember where this conversation was had. I can't remember what channel it was on. But does anybody remember this? I remember it distinctly. It's from the early days. And Don said something like that Earl Kelly loved his sister or sisters and hated him, and he combined that with some kind of sexual abuse that they were experiencing. So we could also assume that Don Wells has experienced abuse, not necessarily sexual abuse, I don't know, by Earl Kelly. And for a number of years, Don and his bio sisters lived with Karen and Earl Kelly. When they divorced, Don Wells Sr. married the babysitter. That woman, I'm just going to call her wife. I know her name. I don't know if her name's out there. I'm not going to call her by name. I'm just going to call her wife. And she's the biological mother of Mary, Don's stepsister, who has been the most outspoken. She's got her own cooking channel. And then there's the other stepsister that Don allegedly abused. Don has admitted to some of that. He's blamed her, Jeannie. So this is another stepsister. There are also other siblings as well who Don named, but they're not connected to this story. They're not connected to today's story. Okay, so we know that Don and Jeannie can be connected by abuse. Okay, so Don said it was only kind of touchy-feely stuff. She was 5 or 6. He was about 12. So he was much, much older. He said it didn't go past touching. However, Jeannie told a different story. Jeannie's story was that this went on for a number of years. And even he tried to continue it when he came out of jail as a teenager. He went to jail. When he came out, he tried to continue it. And at that point, she was about 12 and he would have been about 19 or so. So, an adult. Mary has also made allegations against him. I think the case there is weaker than Jeannie's. I think Jeannie's got the stronger case if this ever went to court. But, okay, so that's another string of allegations. All right, so those are the previous ones that we've heard of before. So, what did he say on Miss Daisy's channel? He accused his dad and his wife of, I guess, being absent parents, that the house was, in his words, a flop house. I don't think we could necessarily call it that, but I don't know. I wasn't there. But all the local kids used to come in and it was just basically a free-for-all. Right, all these kids just came in. There was a bunch of kids living with Don Wells Sr. and his wife at the time. So there would have been Don, his 2 bio sisters, and then maybe about 5 or 6 kids, Mary, Jeannie, and other siblings. So there would have been, 8 or 9 kids living under that roof. Plus, there would have been all the neighbourhood kids who came in when the parents weren't there. So where were the parents? Well, working. Don Wells Sr. drove trucks, so he was away a lot, and when he was home he was tired. So maybe not a very attentive parent. Also, the wife worked as well, so not in the house a lot. So Don said that their schooling suffered. He dropped out of school to get a job. Could we say that there was some neglect here? Yeah, probably. So I'm going to kind of put that in orange, and I'm going to kind of just circle that as there was potential neglect by these two against all of these kids, all of them. Potentially. That's, I guess, reading between the lines. All right, so back to the essay. An allegation that Don made 2 days ago was a man who became Mary's husband. It's unclear whether she was married to him at the time, and he did name him. I'm not going to name him here, but his name's out there. That he raped one of Don's bio sisters. He allegedly was in his early 20s, maybe about 23. She was only 11 years old. Okay, who else have we got? Well, he also named Mary's nephew. I'm not clear whether it's Jeannie's son or another of the siblings' son, but he accused Mary's nephew of raping his daughter, Margie. So Don Wells Jr., our Don Wells, had 2 children with his first wife, Pamela. So there was Margie and then Don Wells III. Now, Don Wells III is an RSO. He's on the SO register. Why is he on the SO register? Because he had a relationship with a girl that was underage. Don said that they were only about 18 months apart or 2 years apart. They weren't, actually. She was only about 14 and he would have been about 19 when this went down, that she got pregnant. So apparently, according to Don, her parents were okay with the relationship until she got pregnant. And then they freaked out and called the cops. So he had to spend some time in jail, and he's on the RSO register. So that would be statutory rape rather than violent rape. It doesn't excuse having a relationship with an underage girl, but that's the story there. Okay, but we've got more, because he also said, and this was unclear, but I think what he meant was that Mary, Jeannie and the other siblings' biological father, so before wife married Don Wells Sr., she was married to someone else, and he was also abusing the children. Now, I could have got that wrong. I did try to qualify that in my live stream yesterday, and people in the chat also agreed that it did sound like he was saying that it was Mary and Jeannie's biological father who was abusing them, but I don't know. That's how it sounded. So we've got 3 generations here. We've got the generation 1, who's either abusing physically, sexually or neglectfully the children in generation 2. And then we've got a pattern of abuse in generation 3 between Mary's nephew and Margie. Those are the allegations that were made. Is that enough? It's enough for now. So let's get into the psychology of intergenerational abuse. So this is my definition of intergenerational abuse: learned or inherited patterns of abusive behaviour through multiple generations of a family. So it could be a family loosely. It could include bio, foster, adopted, step members of a family across multiple generations, so 2 or more generations. And I've said learned or inherited. Now, much of this is learned behaviour, but there's some interesting studies now on epigenetics. So epigenetics is the way that gene expression changes through things like trauma, which then can be passed on to the next generation. But that kind of study of intergenerational abuse and intergenerational trauma through epigenetics is in its infancy. So I would continue to say that the majority of the patterns that contribute to intergenerational abuse are learnt across the generations. They're learnt from one generation to another. And we've got lots and lots of studies that show these links. So we've got this study here: repeat victimisation, re-traumatisation and victim vulnerability. Hurt people get hurt. Oh look, whose name's that? Oh look, is that my name? Dear Lord, that's my name. Maybe it's me. But hurt people do get hurt. All right. So this study explored the contribution that traumatic experiences and psychological post-traumatic stress symptoms make in predicting subsequent re-victimisation. What's relevant to this conversation is that those victims who have suffered from some kind of violent event, those with childhood trauma exposure reported more trauma symptoms than others who were victimised as adults who had no prior trauma. So we know that hurt people who were hurt in childhood, have a harder time when they're hurt again as an adult. And I think that's very relevant to the underlying processes that are going on in this case between Don and Candice. Although we're not talking about Candice's side of the family today, I think that's very relevant. So I just wanted to mention that. But in terms of trauma within families and abuse and neglect within families, especially those that have gone on for generations, where children really have nowhere to turn. If you turn to their grandparents, the grandparents are also maybe traumatised or have been hurt or are hurters, are harmers. And we know that there are many mental health issues, including a variety of psychiatric disorders in those who've experienced childhood trauma, those who've experienced abuse within a family setting, those that have experienced particularly intergenerational abuse. Many survivors struggle with everyday life. Many survivors have experienced symptoms of post-traumatic stress, such as flashbacks, nightmares, emotional distress and trouble sleeping. All of those are potentially diagnostic of PTSD. Many have also experienced anxiety and depression, shame, guilt, hopelessness, anger, often in response to triggering memories of events. So those with childhood trauma who then continue to have trauma throughout their life, they are hurt. Hurt people get hurt again and again. It's common for survivors of childhood trauma and intergenerational abuse to have turned to drugs and alcohol or other addictive coping mechanisms, such as sex addiction, for example, in an attempt to numb their distress. And it's not uncommon for them to have attempted to take their own life. So it's really serious. This stuff is as serious as it gets. It's profound. It has a profound effect on relationships as well. It really does. But how does intergenerational trauma happen? If hurt people get hurt, if one member of the family has been abused or neglected, well, surely people around them recognise that hurt and they want to help. Well, not necessarily, because they may not have the coping mechanisms. There may be addiction problems, mental ill health that prevent that. And also, in a proportion of these cases, and this is what creates intergenerational abuse in the first place, in a proportion of people who are hurt, they go on to hurt others. Hurt people hurt people. You know, if a dog's injured, let's just say a dog's injured or a wild animal's injured, and you try to help them, what do? They snap at you because they're hurt and they don't want to be hurt anymore. So they try to keep you away even though you're trying to help them. So there's that kind of scenario that hurt people try to distance themselves from others, which may have ongoing problems with relationships, but also a proportion, and it is a small proportion, perpetuate an abuse cycle that becomes an intergenerational problem. A proportion of people who are SA'd as children go on to SA others. But we're going to talk about child maltreatment, so kind of the umbrella term for neglect and abuse. What about the intergenerational effects of child maltreatment? And this was a systematic review of the parenting practices of adult survivors of SA, neglect and violence. And this was published in the journal Clinical Psychological Review. A history of maltreatment in childhood may influence adults' parenting practices, potentially affecting their children. This systematic review examines 97 studies investigating associations between parental childhood victimisation with a range of parenting behaviours that may contribute to the intergenerational effects of abuse. Abusive parenting, problematic parenting, positive parenting, and positive parental effects. So affect in this context, in a psychological context, means emotion. So the positive emotions that parents communicate. Key findings include parents who report experiencing physical abuse or witnessing violence in the home, so that could be witnessing domestic violence, for example. So experiencing physical abuse could be a parent hitting them. It could be a parent who is abusive to multiple members of the family. During childhood are at an increased risk of reporting that they engage in abusive or neglectful parenting themselves. So there you've got the intergenerational transmission of physical abuse there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that the child is abused themselves. Witnessing abuse can be enough to sufficiently damage a child so that they become a problematic parent themselves. And remember, this is only a proportion. Not everybody who experiences violence in the home goes on to abuse their own children. We're only talking about a proportion. I'm going to talk about breaking the cycle next, because there is a positive to all of this. So, 2, a cumulative effect of maltreatment experiences, such that adults who report experiencing multiple types or repeated instances of victimisation are at a greater risk of perpetuating child abuse themselves. So, if there's lots of different types of trauma and abuse going on, so there's neglect going on, there may be members of the family essaying each other, that seems to be happening in the extended family of Don Wells when he was a child, including himself being involved in this. what does that make him as an adult? What does that make him? It makes him at increased risk of being a problematic parent himself. So 3, associations between reported childhood maltreatment experiences and parents' problematic role reversal with rejection of and withdrawal from their children. This means that the parent is more like the child. It's like a role reversal where the child is trying to help the parent, and the parent behaving like a child, Candice Bly, it can be seen as a rejection of their own children or a withdrawal from their children. 4, indirect effects between reported childhood maltreatment and abusive parenting via adult intimate partner violence, or as we talked about, it doesn't have to be direct abuse towards a child. This can be done indirectly. And 5, indirect effects between reported childhood maltreatment and lower levels of positive parenting behaviours and emotions via mothers' mental health. Many studies have been done on mothers only, but psychology is psychology. It happens to dads too. Thus, childhood experiences of maltreatment may alter parents' ability to avoid negative and utilise positive parenting practices. But just because you had a bad childhood yourself doesn't mean to say that you're going to go on to be a bad parent. And there's a lot of studies that have been done on breaking the cycle of abuse between generations, and it absolutely is possible. But it takes a really strong person to break the cycle of intergenerational abuse. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the insight into themselves. Not everybody has the support network available to help them do it. And I think that's very important, that there's a support network, that somebody else external recognises that there's a problem here and helps them. But the parent has to want help. They have to want the help. They have to take the help. They have to want to have the therapy or take the medication or go through rehab, whatever is necessary in that particular instance, in that particular family. Whatever those particular problems are, that person has to want to change. So this is an article by Jaffe et al. Safe, stable, nurturing relationships break the intergenerational cycle of abuse. A prospective, nationally representative cohort of children in the United Kingdom. And this is from a few years ago. This is from 2013, but it's a nice little study. This is from the Journal of Adolescent Health. 1,116 families in the United Kingdom who participated in this longitudinal study, so it was a study across time. They kept assessing them. Much of it is relating to mothers, but again, it relates to dads too. We assess mothers' childhood history of maltreatment retrospectively with a validated and reliable interview. Prospective reports of children's physical maltreatment were collected repeatedly up to 12 years. So they followed them for several years. So they compared families in which mothers, so the mother had experienced maltreatment in her childhood, but the children had not. So what was different between the mothers who had been maltreated as children, but their own children weren't, and those in which both mothers and children had experienced maltreatment. So this is the intergenerational abuse group. So the mother had experienced maltreatment as a child herself, and then her children had gone on to experience maltreatment. And then they had a control group, so they had families without any maltreatment in either generation. So what they found in a bunch of analysis: supportive and trusted relationships with intimate partners, high level of maternal warmth towards children, and low levels of parental violence between adults distinguish families in which mothers but not children experience maltreatment from families in which mothers and children experience maltreatment. Families in which only mothers experience maltreatment were largely similar to families in which neither generation had experienced maltreatment. So these mothers who had experienced maltreatment as children but had not gone on to mistreat their children or allow their children to be mistreated had supportive partners. They were warm, so something about them made them warm towards their children. So is this a lack of addiction issues, or is this a lack of depression or any other way? Role reversal, so the mother becoming the child. and low levels of parental violence. This mother here has got the maximum capacity to be able to heal herself. She may have had treatment in the past. She may have had therapy in the past before she had children. We don't know. There's probably a range of reasons why she's got the capacity to be able to keep a relationship that is positive. So there's a lot behind the scenes there, I think, that needs to be unpicked. But one thing's for sure is that safe, stable relationships between intimate partners and a stable family life allows that mother to do her best parenting, even if she's had a very bad childhood herself. Now look at the Wells. Look at Don and Candice. And that's not a jibe at them. It's factual. But let's look at males. The experience of partner relationships for male survivors of childhood sexual abuse, a qualitative synthesis. This study was from 2021. It was by Chloe Wheatman, Gundy Keemley, Michelle Lowe. Who's Michelle Lowe? Oh, who's Michelle Lowe? And Robert Balfour. I don't know who Michelle Lowe is. I'm going to have to look her up. But this was published in the journal Trauma, Violence and Abuse in 2021. Oh, look at the impact factor there. Ooh. Okay, so this is males who had experienced SA as children. All right, because many of these studies are about mothers and about women's experiences. But we've got to remember that men have bad experiences too in childhood. Men are physically abused. Men are SA'd as children. And what impact does that have on their relationships as adults themselves? We know that it can create problems with intimacy. It can create barriers to emotional intimacy. However, in good relationships, where there may or may not be children, because many of these men go on to have their own children, similar to this study that was largely about women and mothers, safe, stable, nurturing relationships is the key here. Intimate relationships that allow a space to heal and experience post-traumatic growth, so growing through your trauma, so you're acknowledging your trauma happened. You might be still experiencing stress symptoms, anxiety, depression because of your trauma, but you've also got that capacity to be able to grow through your life, and that happens through strong relationships. But again, like I said, for the mothers in this study, they have to have that capacity in the first place to do it. Whether that be seeking therapy, whether that be dealing with addiction issues, there has to be a lot behind the scenes to get somebody to a point where they're able to have a good relationship. And also, we've got to remember that these are studies of people in relationships. There's no reason whatsoever why you can't be happily single and be a very good parent, even if you've had horrible experiences yourself. So all is not lost. It is possible to break the cycle, but you have to really want to do it. And in the case of the Wells, I don't see that they want to, honestly. But finally, let's remember why we know Don Wells in the first place. It's because his daughter Summer Moon Utah Wells went missing on the 15th of June 2021. At the time she disappeared, she was age 5. She's female, she's white, she's got blonde hair and blue eyes, she's 3 feet and approximately 40 pounds at the time she went missing. She was last seen wearing grey pants, a pink shirt and was possibly barefoot. If you've seen Summer or have any information regarding her whereabouts, please contact the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office at 423-272-7121 or the TBI at 1-800-TBI-FIND. Alright guys, I hope you found this informative. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Bye guys.